Hey guys, this is Matt Chieco from Pop Poor Review the Movie Podcast. Today we are talking about The Batman. I'm just too excited. Let's get to the review. So like I said, we're talking about the newest entry in the DCEU or just the DC universe. I know it's a different universe, so I don't know if it's actually part of it or if this is just part of their multi-Earth multiverse path that's leading towards the Flash. I'm not sure, but here we are. We're talking about it. It finally came out. This is a spoiler review. It was really good. I mean, I do have some. I think this movie was really, really, really good. But I do think it had some high highs and also some low lows. I'm gonna start with. Let's start with the bad because I want to save the good for later. So one of the aspects of bad that I thought this movie I mean, besides like one part that I really didn't care for in this movie, everything else kind of nitpicky because this was a very good movie. Like I said, I was a little nervous when they first announced it was good 3 hours. I'm like, with long movies, as long as there's material that it doesn't feel like you're slowing down, you're just adding it. It doesn't feel like filler. Then I'm fine with a long run. I'm fine with as long as you need to make this movie. I'm fine with. I just don't. I want it to be important to the story from 0 seconds to the end of the movie. That's my only need when it's a long movie. And I was surprised. I was a little nervous. I was like, there's a lot of characters they're putting in there. I think it might just be too stuffed, and that's why the runtime's long because they have to have it because there's so much in there. And I actually I was wrong, and I was pleasantly surprised. All the characters they were putting in, like the Penguin, Catwoman, Riddler, Batman, Alfred, Gordon, the Joker, they all were like little pieces here and there that worked in this detective story. It was good. I know this sounds like a good note, but I'm gonna get to the why it might have flipped in a second. Because it was like a good and a bad. The runtime was fine, but this movie needed editing, and it needed to be a little shorter because it's like all my bads kind of combined together because the editing, the runtime, and the third act, and some of the writing, all kind of, which is literally most of my only notes for bad. They all combine because if it was edited shorter, and the third act was changed, and the writing was changed for the third act, this could have been it could have went from a really good movie to an amazing movie. And the reason is because I feel like whenever this movie was a detective story, and they took a swing and it worked. And I was so happy because I was like, this is different. And that's why I was really enjoying it in the beginning. The first two acts. The third act is when it was like, I don't know if it was changed because of COVID or what happened, or if it was a studio decision, but for some reason it felt like they kind of ditched the detective story and like tried to squeeze out a superhero story really quick to kind of be like, well, it is still a superhero movie. And I think whenever they did that, especially in the third act just felt like a third act superhero movie. And I was like, you had such a good thing going, like why just kind of ditch the detective part and start doing that? Because anytime you left the detective story, it took me out because I was like, this isn't what the movie should be. This movie is so grounded that anytime you lift from that story, you feel the difference and it impacts it. So the whole third act, when they're in the arena, one, I couldn't really see anything because there was a weird filter. It made everything blurry. And two, it just felt like I was like, this feels like a different movie compared to the rest of the movie. This like last hour felt so different from the other 2 hours. And I was like, and I read some people say the third act was a little crazy and kind of went off the rails, which it did. But I was like, watching the first 2 hours, I was like, how do people think that? I was like, this took a swing and it worked. It like home run. And then the third act came and I was like, I see what they're saying. So if they would have just kept it as a detective story and edited it to make it a little shorter and cut out some of the non-detective parts that weren't really necessary to the movie, this would have been a 10 out of 10 movie. Because it's like right at it's really good. It just couldn't hit that amazing level for me. And then the only other negative I had for it was, I know this is a Batman-centric story, but there was Batman and Bruce Wayne. That's the character. When you have Batman, you have Bruce Wayne. And I feel like there was no Bruce Wayne anyway. So when they did have those like little slivers of Bruce Wayne, it was like I didn't like his Bruce Wayne at all. Robert Pattinson was an amazing Batman. His Bruce Wayne was not that great. So I kind of wish it was either like all Batman, you never saw him out of the suit, or they kind of made the Bruce Wayne, because this was this is like literally watching a comic book or a graphic novel with Batman, and I did not feel that with Bruce Wayne. So I wish it was more representative of Bruce Wayne from the graphic novel and the comic books. And people might come after me for that, but that's just my opinion. And really, that was the only negatives I had for this movie, because everything else was great. And now I'm gonna switch it to the good now, and I'm just gonna say why. I'm gonna go back to why the runtime worked, even though there was my problems with it. Going in, I thought it was gonna be such like a stuffed movie that I'm like, I feel like they're just putting in filler, like I said before. But it like I said, the characters were all integral to the story, and there was they were all part of the certain thing. And I thought the Riddler, like like I said, how the writing maybe suffered in the third act, the story itself was great because it was like a David Fincher film meets Batman, and I think that works perfectly for Batman because he's a dark character. I mean, I thought the story was great. Like I said, the writing for the third act wasn't great, but I thought the story as a whole was great. It was like the Riddler was such a perfect villain for this type of detective neo-noir movie theme genre that he had to get clues and he was going to eat, and it happened the villains kind of popped up, and it was all sort of an origin. Like the Penguin wasn't the Penguin yet. The cat, but you can see how he was sort of was essence of the Penguin. Catwoman wasn't Catwoman yet, but you can kind of see how she was the essence of Catwoman. Batman was Batman because this was his year 2. And you can also, for the Riddler, he wasn't the Riddler yet, like we all know. And like all these characters, they weren't, except for Batman, they all weren't the characters exactly from the comic books. But you can see those little glimmers of it and kind of how it's going to become that and how it kind of started, but also in a very grounded way. More grounded than the Christopher Nolan movies, which I was shocked by because that's such a grounded movie. Those are such grounded movies. And this kind of has more villains that I don't think the Christopher Nolan one would have because he wouldn't consider it grounded. And I think that's interesting. Even Matt Reeves has said he has an idea for Mr. Freeze, which is really interesting. So it's like they kind of brought in the superpower, but still kept it super grounded, which I thought was really impressive. And speaking of Matt Reeves, I thought the directing was really impressive. I thought the directing was impressive. The cinematography was impressive. The visuals were impressive. Like I said, the story was really impressive. All the acting was incredible. Like, literally, Zoe Kravitz is now my new favorite Catwoman. I was really skeptical of Colin Farrell as the Penguin, and he sold me. He was. I know people might find this weird as a comparison, but he reminded me of Jared Leto in House of Gucci, where he just towed that line. And people don't like Jared Leto in House of Gucci, but I really did. And he kind of just towed that line to like campy, but really good. And I thought he was on that line tiptoeing beautifully. The Riddler, Paul Dano, amazing. All these people gave their all, and it really just helped build the world, which is one of my biggest positives. The world building in this movie was amazing. I literally, like, from the second we started watching the movie, I felt like I was in Gotham. And it, as much as it feels like a normal Gotham, the one you have in your head, it felt a little different because it almost felt like you were in a video game or a comic book that you were plugged into. I've never felt that with a Gotham yet, like where I actually felt like I was in the world. And that's why that's why like all these positives was why I was loving this movie. And just that third act kind of dipped it for me, not to make it bad, still very good, but it just couldn't be like amazing. If you were to stop the movie right before the third act and ask me, is this your favorite Batman movie? I might have said it may be tied with The Dark Knight. But this movie then dropped after the third act. I said, after the third act, The Dark Knight is still my favorite Batman movie because one, it had that Bruce Wayne Batman balance, and also just I thought the story was great. It had all the pros that this had, but some of the cons I had for this movie, that one did not. The Dark Knight from Christopher Nolan. I mean, that's just like pinnacle Batman. I know that people think this is pinnacle Batman. I can see what you're saying, and I agree it's a great Batman movie. It captured it great, but I don't know. It's just The Dark Knight is just amazing. Oh, and I have to say, I forgot to put this in my pros. The score was, oh my God, it's amazing. Like, amazing. Like, literally, it just, I felt like I was watching a detective movie. And, like, I think nowadays with superhero movies, because there's so many, you have to have that second genre to kind of, like, differentiate it. And I think when they kind of lifted that a little bit and gave it that kind of superhero-ness, especially in the third act, like I said, it kind of watered it down a little bit. And I just wasn't. I think if the third act was either completely changed, and it could have been because of COVID. I know like they had problems with like stopping for COVID and all that. It's just I feel like it could have been handled differently the third act, especially for this movie, because this movie does not need a big third act. It could have been a more subdued third act, like a kind of smaller scaled one. I think would have been more appropriate, but still felt. I think they could have meshed superhero detective a little better towards the end of the movie, and they didn't. But my whole thing was that started like the beginning was an origin story. It was like him narrating, and I'm like, and like the whole like seeing him in the shadows. I was like, I felt creeped out. That was an incredible opening. I thought it was amazing, and I was so impressed for the first up until the third act, and then the third act, like I said, it didn't tank it for me. It just made it feel a little less of a great movie. It was really good. It just could have been amazing if it changed the third act. But I mean, the opening when he's pretty much like narrating, I was like, I'm literally like watching a live comic book, which I thought was incredible. And yeah, so for me, the beginning was like strong, and like right before the third act, there was a little bit of a dull in the story, and then the third act happened, which I didn't care for, but I thought I mean, they had good shots in the third act, but like I don't know if COVID hurt the third act, so I don't know what happened, but I just wasn't feeling it. So it dipped for me in the third act, and then after the third act, when they kind of like were ending the movie, it peaked back up. So I think that's my biggest takeaway or complaint about it was the third act, because I think if that was changed, this could have been a whole different conversation, just all pros really. I mean, and it would have just been really nitpicky, really nitpicky, like really tiny. I would love to see it again, really like now, because when you go into a movie the first time, you kind of like you miss some things. So I want to go in and maybe see it again, and maybe the third act won't seem as bad as I thought it was, but I need to see it again, and it might go up in how I liked it. But as of right now, I really liked it. It couldn't be iconic because of that third act. So if I were to rate it, I guess I would give it a 9, which I said it's a great movie. It's not iconic. It's not at that 10 level. So I have to say this. I think personally they should scratch everything they have for the DCEU, DC universe, and build within this universe. Because I think because this one's so dark, you can then give Superman more of like I liked Henry Cavill's Superman, I really did, and I really liked Ben Affleck as Batman as well. But they both were kind of darker characters, which in the comics I think Superman's more hope and Batman's more grim. And I think with this universe, because Batman's so dark in this movie and so like grim, I think you can make maybe more of a hopeful Superman. And I think you can just, because this movie had comedy and it worked really well. Like as dark as it was, the comedy sold. And that's why I'm saying like you can be the dark universe. Like Marvel is great at just like, yeah, it's bold, it's fun, it's more uplifting, and they have the darker movies, and I think DC can be like dark and serious and have those lighter movies and still mesh like the MCU does. I really think if they were considering it, if they were thinking about to do Warner Brothers or DC, if you're listening, you're probably not. I think that's what you should do, because I feel like you're just kind of throwing shit at walls now and seeing what sticks for the DCEU, and I don't think that's the best thing to do. So, also, I keep forgetting stuff. The action, chef's kiss. Like, so good. So good. And also, if anyone's listened to the podcast, you know how much I hate Spiral. And I think this movie did what Spiral was trying to achieve, with the whole like kind of detective solving crimes and stuff like that, and like they're getting kind of tortured and shit like that. And I think I watched it, I was like, Spiral should have just waited, saw this movie, and then been like, oh, we can't do this because this can only be done by very highly skilled people who are really good in their craft. So they were like, oh, let's just not make it. And then I wouldn't have had to sit through it, because unfortunately I had to sit through it and I fucking hated it. So sorry, that's just me venting. That's the review for the Batman. I actually am very excited to see it again. So let me know what you thought about it in the comments, and I will see you later. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Click around our YouTube page. Cheers.